Do you long for a closer walk with God that turns mundane moments into holy encounters? Joining me now to talk about her new book, Holiness Here, Searching for God in the Everyday Events of Everyday Life, is award-winning author and senior editor of Faith Today magazine, Karen Stiller. Welcome to 100 Huntley Street, Karen.
Thank you, Laura. It's lovely to be here.
We're so honored to have you join us today and to be talking about your new book, Holiness Here. I devoured it in one sitting.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. It's lovely to hear.
Yes.
I'm glad.
Yes. And, you know, Karen, something about this book is that the authenticity and the honesty present in this book was very, very powerful for my own heart. And it helped me ask questions and wonder about who God is in his holiness and what does it mean for me to be holy in light of that. Maybe something that seemed insurmountable at certain points in my life, and we'll get into that in a moment. But, you know, the inspiration for this book came to you sitting in a church service, listening to a woman named Pastor Michelle.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I was in church one normal Sunday, and my friend Pastor Michelle prayed, "Give us grace, God, to lead a holy life." And I was instantly struck with the question, what does that mean? What does it mean for me to lead a holy life and the people who I'm sitting in this church with to lead a holy life? And it felt more obvious watching her up front, you know, in her clericals, leading the service, leading us in worship, to think of her leading a holy life, but what about me? And so I started out with that question, and the book is my, you know, clumsy attempt to find some kind of an answer.
That's really good. That's so interesting. And it's a whole journey, the book, and I see it. And you bring the reader along the journey, and then they relate and they say, oh, that's how you live out holiness in a mundane moment, in a quiet moment, where we're not sure how God wants to move, but we just say yes. One of the interesting things you write in the book is that there is a PR issue when it comes to holiness. And that just was that was very good for me. I think I've had a PR issue with holiness.
Yeah.
But tell our viewers what you mean by that.
Well, I think that there's a big level and a smaller level answer to that, I think. So I think holiness has a public relations problem in that people believe that to be holy is to be boring, to be judgmental. I think that's what the world thinks of holiness, that the church being holy means the church being mean and being mean-spirited and telling everyone what to do and leading a life that's, you know, austere and not exciting and filled with rules and regulations. And then I think within the church, holiness has a public relations problem in that we view it as something other than what we are and who we are, as something insurmountable, as unobtainable, of that other people can do it more than we can do it, and that it's just not who we are, even though God has actually told us that we are a holy people. And so, yeah, that's holiness's PR problem.
Yes, that's a good synopsis of the PR problem of holiness. Oh, it's good. It's a press release on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, in Holiness Here, you also go in to define biblical holiness. And for our viewers right now, the word holy, even in the Bible, what does it mean? And what does it mean about God? And what does it mean about the followers of Jesus, who, you're right, the writers of the New Testament say we are called to be a holy people, a priesthood?
Yeah, exactly. So when we think of God as holy, I think we know what we mean by that, and we know theologically that God is unlike any other, that he is holiness and that God is holy. And we all know, I'm sure, the correct answer theologically, that, you know, through what Jesus accomplished on the cross and the resurrection, that we are invited into this new identity of a holy people, and that but it doesn't stop there. And that's what I wanted to try to sort of recapture in my thinking and in our thinking, I guess, is that holiness is an invitation to a new way of living that's actually full of adventure and exciting, and it is life-giving and life-offering. So holiness is actually a way we are, but it's also a way we do life. And I use the term holy is and holy does, or holiness is and holiness does. So it is a condition, and it's also a journey. And a warm invitation is a phrase I use in the book, as opposed to a scary Leviticus-like command, which I think not everyone would love that I say that in the book. Like, maybe sterner people might not like that. But for me, it's a helpful way of viewing holiness as, something less frightening and less life-changing in the bad way. We still get to have friends and have fun and laugh and enjoy art and beauty and love and music and good food, and we can be holy.
And one of the interesting points you make in the book is that within experiencing beauty and these wonderful, like, holy doesn't have to be hard.
Right.
Holy can be beautiful and loving and creative. And that's interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting to me too, because at one point in the book, I think I do phrase it as a question, like, is the hard thing always the holy thing? And is the holy thing always the hard thing? And I don't know if I come up with any great answer, but I know that I have grown also through beauty and through love and, through being a mother, through being a wife, through being a friend. I have also grown in holiness. And we tend to think that we think that we only grow through the hard things. But, we live in a broken world, but it's also a beautiful world that God loves. And so when we enter fully into the goodness, we're also changed by goodness. And I think that's an important part of the holiness PR, rehabilitation program.
That's interesting too, because for our viewers watching who've maybe experienced a lot of hardship in life, maybe they've lost the idea that they can grow in the goodness and the love of life. And yet that is where God really does restore so much of our identity and brings healing to us.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so good.
I think that's true, Laura.
Yeah. And, the choice to live out this holy life is, well, what I see in the book, it's these smaller choices. It's these moments. It's these mundane moments. Like, you've got one story in here about a neighbor who was keeping, I just can't even say it almost, keeping you up all night and until 4 a.m. And the next day you were supposed to write, and the next morning you were very loud in the house because you wanted to wake them up.
Absolutely. I 100% wanted to wake them up.
Tell us that story, but your process.
Right. So I was kept awake all night, and I'm sure it was my book I was trying to work on the next day. And so when I finally, got up and thought, I'm not going to be able to write today, I stood just on the other side of this shared wall of our very old house, and I jumped up and down like 3 times in a very dramatic way to try to make as much noise as possible. And then I went and slammed the bathroom door, for good measure. And then I instantly felt like, oh my gosh, like, why did I do that? Like, that's silly, it's immature, it's, kind of vindictive, yet delicious for a moment. And I need to not be that person. And so I kind of felt bad about myself, and then I, shrugged it off. And then later I made cookies and gave them to my neighbor as a way of saying I'm sorry for the thing that I'm sure they were so deeply sleeping they had no idea that I had done. But it was just a little mini lesson for me about my inclination toward, not doing the right thing, and then a way to try to reach out in love to a neighbor that I loved. And as a little aside, when the book was coming out, I went out to dinner with that neighbor and reached across the table and said, "You're in the book." So I had to tell her the origin story of those cookies, but she was very gracious.
That is so fun. That is so neat.
Yeah.
There's so many stories like this in the book, and I think it's your authenticity. It's the honesty that you tell, almost the challenges and struggles of your human heart, which we all have.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting in the story you told there, but also throughout the book, all the different stories, is I see this moment where you're processing, or the people around you are processing, what could I do here?
Right.
Like, we could do the thing that makes us feel good and gratifies our flesh or our desires or whatever the emotion is, or we could do the thing that maybe God's asking us to do.
Yeah.
And that's the holy moment.
Yeah. There's 2 things I'd love to pick up on that. One, I'll start with this one, that we are participants in our own transformation. So that has been an important lesson for me in my spiritual walk, is that I am not, even though I would love to be instantly transformed, and I know that is part of some people's stories, I remained a jerk. So I needed to try. I needed to try to live the life that God was calling us to live, that God is calling us to live. And it wasn't just going to happen, magically. I needed to participate. And exercise some effort. And so for me, that is part of the holiness walk. It's a decision to engage in love, really. So yeah, some effort is required. And then the other thing that I wanted to pick up on that is the power of telling our true stories and of being authentic and transparent with each other. And that is something I learned in my years of being a minister's wife, that, you know, on a selfish level, actually, the more honest I was, the more loved I felt generally. That people do not want a pretend version of us. They want the real thing. And when we can kind of turn the light on in the room about our own frailty and brokenness, it's actually a relief to other people. And it's an invitation to them to also, you know, kind of get real. And in that, we can lead each other toward healing and wholeness. So honesty has never failed me. And I think it's a gift that we can give each other.
Mm. And speaking of, you know, being honest with other people, nowhere is that more apparent than in the life of a healthy church, or a church that's at least trying to follow God. And in the book you write, people don't attend church because they think they're so great. It's surely because they know they are not.
Yeah.
They know they need God's mercy and the body to hold them in, to haul them back up on the life draft when they slip off, and to remind them again and again that they are holy and they get to act that way. You are in the boat with us. I think sometimes people feel like I'm not holy enough to live this holy life,
Right.
that God's asking me to live.
Yeah.
But that's actually a lie.
Yeah.
He's already told us our identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And we really compare ourselves to other people. And that would be another observation I made in my years, you know, with my husband in church ministry, was that everybody thinks everybody else is doing a better job at being holy or living the Christian life. And so that's another valuable thing that honesty brings, is just knowing that, yeah, we are all in this together, and it's not a race, and it's not an upward climb to holiness. It's a big, you know, messy, spirally journey that does have moments of beauty. And I also talk about that in the book, that it's okay, and this sounds risky even for me to say this, but it's okay to look back on your, you know, the life story you're living and say, yeah, I can see that I've grown a little bit. I can see that maybe I won't try to wake my neighbor up anymore. I can see that I learned something and that God is doing something in my life, because it would be strange to think that we don't grow and change when we know that Jesus is doing a good work in us. We're taking something away from his power when we think we can't grow in this holy life. So yeah, again, that mutual encouragement, that coming alongside each other is, we can't do this alone.
And I don't think we can grow into the holiness God calls us to live out without the body with us, in community. You know, you talked about remembering and looking back. And that, in the book, you unpack that. But that's part of the holiness journey, looking back at where God has been faithful and what he's done and how things have changed. You know, as we neared the end of your book, the second last chapter, there's a lot of reflection in that chapter about the loss of your husband, Brent. And that happened in the midst of you writing this book, and yet you chose to include it.
Yeah.
What was it like to write that chapter on holiness in the midst of sorrow?
Yeah, so hard. My husband very briefly had a kidney transplant that seemed successful, and then just past the 1-year mark, he was literally struck down by a very rare side effect and died of brain cancer about 5 to 6 weeks after diagnosis. So in terms of my book writing, I was almost done, but not quite. And I obviously stopped writing the day he entered the hospital. And then a few months later, made the choice to pick up the book again and just see what that felt like. And, you know, am I capable of finishing? Do I want to finish it? Do I still believe what this book says? Can I still stand by it? And understanding that and, you know, maybe it's because I'm such an honest writer and that's a very high value for me. I couldn't not write about it. I would have felt like I was lying to not include this new, awful part of the story that we are now living. And so I wrote this chapter called Sorrow, and I was very careful. I tried to be very careful to not talk about what I didn't know that I didn't know yet. And as we record this, I'm sort of 18 months into this grief journey, and I still don't know the lessons. So I want to be careful about saying what I think I've learned. But what I saw happening was the love of community, the sharing of grief, and the bearing of one another's burdens sort of come to life in our life. I saw the impact of my husband's ministry, like through what people shared with me and my children, our children. That was beautiful to think about what kind of a holy life he led. And so much of it was making room for people. Brent was just brilliant at loving people well. And, I talk, I think, hopefully in a funny way, a little bit about him. He always attracted the fringe people, the kind of weird people. He loved the poets and the prophets and the writers and the artists. And he just made room in a way that sometimes church doesn't. And so that was, for me, a big part of where I saw the holiness in his life. So, grief shatters us and it breaks us open, and there is a decision about which direction we're going to grow in. And so that being participants in our own transformation, deciding that this terrible thing that happened in our lives for my children and I, that we would try to participate in it, making us not bitter and hopefully more loving people. And that is the journey we're on. So yes. I wrote about it, and I hope that it was okay. I wrote about it nervously.
Yes. Well, I read that chapter, and so many things stuck out to me. Throughout the whole book, actually, I could see points where Brent's legacy was speaking through you. And once I got to know him in that chapter, I said, oh, that's what that is right there. Something you said was nobody remembers really Brent's sermons, or they do, but what they talk about is his presence with them. Yeah. And that struck me. I said, that's the way to live, as I was reading it.
Oh, thank you.
So, Karen, I'm so thankful you shared this hard part of your journey, and I know that you're continuing on the journey. For that viewer watching right now who is on a journey maybe they didn't expect, and yet they know God is calling them to make holy choices, to love him and to love their neighbor, to love themselves, what would you say to them right now?
I would say that Jesus is the man of sorrows, and that means more to me now than it ever has, and that he is with us in our hard times, and to do the work of believing that, because you actually might not always feel that way. And so it's a decision. Again, boy, everything's so much hard work sometimes, but it's a decision to believe that Jesus is with us in those hard moments, and to see his love through the love of other people who are hopefully courageous enough to stick by us. And so I'd actually rather speak to the people who are in the lives of hurting people and say, don't leave them alone. Show up, be with them. Grieving people are such hard work. We really are such hard work. And I am so thankful for the people who have stuck with me and, commit it. Yeah. You don't need a lot of people, but you need a few people for a long time. So be those few people, and that's what makes the difference. Mm-hmm. You are being Jesus when people are not seeing him so clearly in other ways.
And that's a holy choice right there.
Yeah, 100%.
Karen, thank you so much for sharing your heart today, for this time together, talking about your book. And thank you so much for writing Holiness Here.
Well, thank you, Laura. Thanks for having me on and for hosting these amazing conversations. I'm honored. Thank you.
Thank you.